ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Before we start today's story, we're very excited to share that tickets for Conversations Live, our national tour, are selling fast. Extra shows have been added in Adelaide, Hobart and Perth. We've got a wonderful show planned for you with special guests, memorable moments and a few surprises along the way. Sarah and I would love to see you. There's a link in the show notes, or you can go to the Conversations page for more details. Tim Pocock always wanted to be an actor. As a kid, Tim was a precociously talented musician and singer. He even sang with the Australian Opera. But acting, that's what he really wanted to do. And Tim did it. Tim was in the ABC TV series Dance Academy, and he got cast in an X-Men movie in the United States, where he got to play Cyclops, a mutant who shoots red energy blasts from his eyes. And at 23, Tim was there at the LA premiere of the film, alongside major Hollywood stars. But the whole time, Tim says he was being gnawed at by shame and self-loathing. Not for anything he did, but for who he was. Tim was raised in a very conservative family and educated at a school in Sydney with close links to Opus Dei, an institution within the Catholic Church. Within this world, Tim was playing the part of a dutiful, devout son, but he was assailed by the thought that he was secretly wicked, not much better than a murderer. What he was, in fact, was gay, and he had to hide it from everyone, from the other boys at school, who beat him up anyway, from his family, and particularly from his charismatic, energetic mother, who sent him to a therapist to expunge the homosexuality from his soul. Tim Pocock's memoir is called The Truth Will Set You Free, Growing Up Gay in Opus Dei. Hi, Tim.
Richard, thank you so much for having me.
Your family's Australian, but some of your earliest years were spent in Ireland when you were little. A little town called Crosshaven outside of Cork in the southeast of Ireland.
That's right.
What was your little Irish cottage like? What do you remember of it?
Oh, it's just so beautiful. The actual cottage itself was so small, so quaint, that white stone kind of feel. You just felt like you were living a few hundred years ago.
This is before the Irish economy took off and you're living in this little cottage. What does an evening bath involve in a little Irish cottage back in those days?
It would take a lot of time because our hot water unit would never work. So we'd always have to boil pots and pots and pots of water. We'd fill it up with a bit of the cold and then just constantly mum and dad would be rotating with the boiling pots of water to heat it up. But I mean, it was kind of quaint and beautiful and there's something sort of romantic in that sort of lifestyle.
Like I said, you were precociously talented as a musician. How did music come into your life to begin with?
It was sort of accidental, really. I think, my parents, they did the thing that a lot of parents do, which is they just get their kids involved in some musical instrument, almost as a way to teach discipline or to see how they go. So my sister was learning piano and I was maybe 3 years old and I would hear when she was making mistakes. I wasn't learning yet and I would just walk up to the piano and I'd correct her. And mum goes, "Oh, I think he might actually be good at this." So she started me at 3 on the piano. When we moved to Ireland, I also took up violin for a time as well. And it was just something that just felt really natural to me.
How involved were you then with music in the life of the church you were attending with your family?
Yeah, so as I grew older and my abilities got more attuned, one of the things that I was always taught was that God gave us abilities so that we could use them to honour him. So if I was good at music, it meant that I needed to dedicate that to God in some way. So that means, playing organ and at Mass. When I started singing, it was like singing in choirs or as a soloist at Mass, at weddings, funerals, all that kind of thing. Because that was the whole intention, was for the glorification of God. So yeah, when I was probably about 13 when I started playing organ at Mass and ended up doing that at 3 different parishes. And then years later, I ended up teaching a kids' choir at a local Franciscan parish as well. And so I just thought if I can do whatever I can in my day-to-day to prove who I am and how much I believe, then A, that people will see it and it'll help keep the mask on, but B, it was almost like atonement for my sins. I'm like, God, look, here I am. I'm doing all of this stuff for you. Like, please don't be angry with me about this other thing that I've asked you to change and you won't.
What do you remember of forming your first boy crush, Tim?
I've had arguments with people about this because people think that you don't notice sexuality young and all of that, but I don't really equate sexuality and attraction because it only becomes a sexual thing later on when you start to understand sexuality. But if you're instinctually attracted to someone, that's giving you something. That's telling you something. And yeah, I know for a fact the first person that I ever had a crush on was an altar boy at the local parish that we went to in Crosshaven. And we left Crosshaven when I was 7. So I know that prior to being 7, I was already starting to notice boys.
Did you feel that was wrong at the time?
It just felt different to what I knew. I didn't know the word homosexual. The only definition of the word gay that I knew meant happy. But I'd never seen same-sex couples. That was never something that had entered my ethos because everyone that I knew was, man marries woman, man marries woman. Anytime you hear people talking about crushes, it's always, a girl on a boy or a boy on a girl. And any kind of entertainment that we were allowed to absorb was very strictly kept to stuff from years ago. We'd watch, My Fair Lady instead of My Girl. Because, my parents didn't want us watching something that was modern. So, just kind of seeing those sort of more old school, wholesome things, I'd never thought of the idea that a guy should like another guy. So the fact that I was looking at this boy and I started to realize that it was the way that the female heroines were looking at the male heroes in these old films, I sort of just said, I've never seen this before. That feels different. Different always means wrong in that world, and so therefore I'm just not going to say anything about it.
My Fair Lady has Henry Higgins cohabiting with a man and has this perfectly chaste attraction to Eliza Doolittle. It's really very camp, that movie.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of those things are, because we also used to watch Wizard of Oz, which, famously is sort of the big rainbow flag flying film from the last, 100 and something years.
It's Judy Garland.
Exactly,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. What else was I'm asking you to watch?
Well, I mean, we watched The King and I, and I have to say, young little me was quite impressed by Yul Brynner's magnificent physique, prancing around on stage in nothing but, Aladdin pants.
What kind of a woman was your mum? I mentioned in the intro that she comes across as charismatic. Is that a fair description of her?
Absolutely, yeah. Everyone gravitated towards her. She was just a larger-than-life kind of person, very generous, I will say to a fault, because her generosity would often encroach on other people's time. She would decide, okay, we're going to do this generous thing, but it wasn't just her doing it. It would mean the whole family would be doing it, and then we'd be kind of like trudging in her wake. But then, we'd all have to put on smiles and pretend that we're all there to do the same thing. But yeah, she really ingratiated herself to so many people, and always, even up until she passed away, she was very selfless. She was incredibly loved, and when she did pass, her funeral was so well attended, and I think that was a testament to who she was. But it did make it kind of difficult sometimes to be her son.
When you were little, your sister, you write that you and your sister were sort of playing around as you do with kids, and she, just for fun, treated you like a dolly and dressed you up as a girl.
Yeah.
What effect did that have on her and your dad?
We just thought we were, joking around, and she put me in a little frock and she put like a rubber band around my tiny little head and gave me this tiny little, I don't know what you'd even call it. It was trying to be a bun, but it didn't work. And and they just said, oh, this is our friend Tamina, and we were like giggling around. And Mum was just like, take that off. And it was the first time I ever heard the term cross-dressing. And she would just talk about how it was so disrespectful to God's design that a male would ever dress like a female. And I just thought, we're just young kids. I was maybe 5 or 6 at the time. We were just being innocent and playing around, having a laugh. And then it became, this biblical kind of thing for us in our household. She would use examples of people in pop culture. She would point out Michael Jackson, very big at the time. We, of course, were never allowed to listen to his music, but you couldn't escape his fame. And she would point out his high cheekbones and his long hair and his dance moves and just say, that's not what you want to be. A man's supposed to look like a man. So you never dress in any kind of way that makes you more feminine or anything like that. And Yeah, that really innocent little moment with me and my sister turned out to be kind of a big deal.
So you've got that and your little boy crush on an altar boy. What do you then conclude, do you think, about your impulses and instincts as a human being when that sort of thing is being said to you?
Yeah, I just remember already feeling ashamed about something that I didn't understand. I just already felt like there was a barrier in my life that was making me different to how I was meant to be, and that even on mere suspicions or even something as innocent as playing dress-ups with my sister, that seemed to have quite dire ramifications.
Does it mean you conclude that there's part of you that's an enemy to yourself?
Absolutely, yeah.
An enemy, because that's a strong word, isn't it?
Yeah, I felt like there was a disease and that maybe as I grew older, the cure might just naturally come.
So the family moved back to Australia. You were put in a regular Catholic school for a little while in Sydney. Then your mum decided to send you to another educational institution called Redfield College instead. Why there? Why did she want to take you there from the regular Catholic school you were going to?
There were a few reasons. The first reason was that she had actually started working at a school called Tangara School for Girls, which is a sister school to Redfield College. They're both part of an organisation called PARED, which stands for Parents for Education. Those schools were set up in the 80s by a group of very conservative families who wanted to have more control over the kind of education that their kids were getting. They felt that the Catholic school system was becoming too modern. Their word would be trendy that they would use. They also didn't like co-education, thought boys and girls should always be separate. And they thought by having an independent school, they'd be able to have a bit more of a control over the curriculum that was being taught that would therefore be more in line with their conservative values. So Mum was teaching at one of those schools, and then 6 months into that, she was able to pull some strings with PARED and get me into Redfield College.
What was the daily routine like once you started going to Redfield?
Yeah, well, our daily routine all my life was always start off with the morning prayer. You always start off dedicating everything, including your every breath and your every step, to God's glory, so that you don't set a foot wrong and you keep yourself, reminded constantly that everything is for God. Everything I do has to be good. So we'd start off with that, and then we'd pray in the car. We'd usually go to Mass in the morning. Obviously, once I was at Redfield, because they offered daily Mass there, that was something we didn't have to do in the morning. We could do it at school. But when we'd arrive at Redfield, we'd always have an assembly on the basketball court. The teachers would, shout out at ease and attentions, his sort of very kind of like militaristic kind of formation. Then we'd say a prayer, and a lot of the times that prayer would be in Spanish because Jose Maria Escrivá, who started Opus Dei, he was from Spain, and that's the birthplace of Opus Dei. And then we, learned Hail Marys, Our Fathers, Glory Bees, the Angelus, all of that in Spanish as well. And then, we'd get into class and oftentimes be taught things through the sort of religious lens.
You said that both these schools in the Hills District of Sydney were closely linked to an organisation called Opus Dei, which is Latin for the work of God. Opus Dei was an organisation founded in 1928 in Spain by this priest you mentioned, Escrivá. What can you tell me about Opus Dei? What do you know about Opus Dei?
I obviously did a bit of research for the book when I was writing it because I didn't want to speak out of turn. And so I was looking through the school's websites and stuff, and they do have mentions of it there, but they say that they have chaplains that are part of Opus Dei. And yet, as a student there, our teaching staff were all, well, not all, but there were a lot of teaching staff that were members of Opus Dei.
Yeah, I looked at the website myself. It's pretty coy about its associations with Opus Dei, but you say it's very, very present in the life of the school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the principal at the time when I was there was a member of Opus Dei. He's what they call a numerary, which is a celibate member of Opus Dei, someone who is not a priest, or if they're a female, they're not a nun if they are a numerary, but they still have a life of celibacy. They live very simple lives. And for a lot of them, they would live in study centres that were affiliated with the schools. After school programs would happen. You can go and do your homework. They'd have a little chapel there and do a bit of spiritual guidance, do activities on weekends. They would have camps during the school holidays, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the chaplain was also part of Opus Dei. They have this mentoring program at the school. In my day, it was called the tutorial system. Now it's called the mentoring program, where a teacher from the school is assigned a bunch of students, or as a student, you're assigned a teacher who, most cases, is an Opus Dei numerary or supernumerary, a supernumerary being a married member of Opus Dei. They would then take you maybe once a month out of class for one-on-one sessions just to talk about your growth as an individual, as a young man of God. And, you know, in those sessions, they would ask about any struggles you might be having and that kind of thing. And everything that they were saying would come from their lens of how they thought someone should be developing. They would then use that time to encourage you to go to the study centre after school and spend more time with those people. And then when you were there, there'd be another person that would come and have little chit-chats with you, and they'd ask you things like if you'd consider joining yourself. And you're like, you know, a teenager yourself, and they're sensibly asking you if you'd like to become a celibate person at that young of an age.
There's stories that a lot of the numeraries involved in the life of these colleges practice self-mortification. Did you see that? Is that something you understand? What do you know of these practices of self-mortification?
Yeah, so that's obviously the thing that a lot of people associate with Opus Dei, I think made famous by the Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown's book.
Which is a very silly movie. But
it is, absolutely. Yes. It's very outrageous, and I will say that that's not the Opus Dei that I know, and there's no self-whipping monks in my book. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, you know, Opus Dei doesn't have like a monk ordership, so that's just plain wrong in and of itself. But it was something that was always rumoured. But if you were to ask a teacher at school, they would just get really defensive. And oftentimes you'd get a detention or you'd be sent out of class or something because they'd be offended by you asking about it. And even as a young kid, I would sort of think, well, why the secrecy? It's a yes or a no question. If the answer is no, just say no. So I always think there's obviously something in there that you're not wanting to say. And I think that in terms of the Catholic faith itself, you're supposed to be honest about everything. And I don't think secrecy can exist in an honest world.
You said you and other students were being encouraged to talk about how you were going, what things were troubling you. Could you ever have been honest about that with them?
Absolutely not. No. I always knew in those sessions that there was a question that they weren't asking that they were getting to. I had started singing professionally as an opera singer when I was 10, which wasn't a masculine, manly thing to do. Based on that alone, that's when I started to have the rumours spreading about me that I was gay because I was doing this effeminate thing and I wasn't into sports. I was singing like a woman on stage every night, and because that's what a boy soprano does. Then I would, complain to my parents, and they would say, you could afford to butch up a little bit. And then you go to school and you have your mentor, who is also, in my case, every one of my mentors. They were all members of Opus Dei, and then they would come and have your sit-down chats, and they would say things like, why don't you just try and have similar interests to these other boys? Maybe try and be better at sports. Maybe.
Right, you're supposed to be this rugged sports-playing dude.
Yeah.
In fact, you're on stage as a boy singer in the opera house, dressed like a little boy Mozart with a powdered wig and pointy shoes and silk breeches and all of that. That's not the masculine ideal they really wanted for you at that point.
Not at all.
No.
It was something that if we came to the presentation nights, they of course would trot me out and have me sing Parnus Angelicus or something in front of everyone.
And that's good.
That's
right.
good because then A, it's a religious song, and B, it kind of makes them look like, look at how rounded our education is. But meanwhile, I'm like, well, I've done all of this, all of my own, myself. You guys have actually nothing to do with my musical abilities or my success outside of school. But then meanwhile, that thing is actually making me miserable while I'm at your school, and you're not really doing anything about that.
So there you are on stage as a boy, 9 years old, on the stage of the Opera House, singing like an angel and getting these tumultuous rounds of applause, but then you've got to go back to school the next day. What kind of verbal abuse did you get for the kind of things you were doing at the time?
So it started, I unfortunately have the letters COCK in my surname. So it started with people coming up with, all kinds of derivatives for that. Then when the kids were younger and they hadn't developed a huge vocabulary yet, it would just be like, you're a girl. because I had a high voice and I was a boy soprano. So it's like, oh, you're a girl, you sing like a girl. And then as that sort of went on, that would sort of translate into like, oh, you're gay. Would say, call me faggot, poofter, homo, gaylord, buck pirate, or everything. You know, as they learned more offensive things to say, they absolutely did say it. Apart from the fact that I sang like a girl, I was also a bit smaller than everybody else. I was a bit slighter. I wasn't as tall. So I just wasn't the most sort of, you know, butch 9-year-old that you can imagine. So it sort of made me an easy sort of physical target, which would start off with like pushes, shoves, trips, that kind of thing, and then would end up becoming a lot more. They used to do this thing called stacks on, where you'd just be kind of walking around minding your own business, and you'd notice that a few of the bigger, more popular kids would be sort of crowding around you. Then all of a sudden, one of them would yell out stacks on, and then everyone would just jump on top of you and start sort of punching, kicking, and you'd just be at the bottom of the pile without any kind of way of getting out. And, you know, the teaching staff, you know, they would see that it was always me at the bottom of the pile. And their attitude was always just like, okay, guys, come on now. You know, they saw the roughhousing as being this macho thing. But for me, I was thinking, I've got to perform tonight, so I hope I haven't broken any bones. I can't scream because then I'll ruin my voice and then I won't be able to do my solo tonight on stage. So I'll just keep quiet and allow it to sort of be this. And a lot of the time, the teachers, when they would see it with me, they'd be sort of just like, why is it always you?
Oh, it was your fault. You'd brought this on yourself somehow?
Yeah. And then I'd have the mentoring sessions and they'd bring it up and just say, you know, try and connect with the boys in a little bit of a better way. You know, stop making yourself a target. And I'd be like, well, why would I make myself a target? I don't want this. And I'd go home and I'd talk to my parents about it. But the way that the school is structured is that when they have the sort of parent-teacher nights, you're not just meeting with the class teacher, you're also meeting with the numerary or supernumerary who was your mentor, and they're passing on how their sessions have been going with you as well. And then the parents would talk to the school about what they are thinking, what their concerns are at home. And so then the school and your parents are all working towards sort of a way of manipulating you into a way that they see is correct. So there's nowhere for you to really turn if you know deep down that there is something that you're hiding, that's a secret, that you know that they're against. There's no outlet because they're all sort of part of the gang.
What about your mum? I mean, her son's being kicked and punched repeatedly, kicked and punched on the ground by a bunch of other kids. What did she do about that?
Well, that was the thing. You know, I think I was in a bit of a special case because my mum did eventually become principal of the primary school at Tangara. So though she herself was never a member of Opus Dei, she was obviously not a numerary because she was married, but she also wasn't a supernumerary either. But she was very much a big believer in their way of life and their ideologies and their conservative ideals. And being that she was a principal, she was an authority figure within that world as well.
She wanted to uphold the school's reputation then?
100%. So it was sort of like, you know, my sister and I had to be these perfect shining examples of what that schooling system can produce.
But you weren't, and you couldn't be.
Exactly, yeah.
Were you very angry with your mother about that?
I was. I found, you know, even at such a young age, I found there was so much circular conversation. I would talk about being miserable and how things were happening, and I would hear the same things that my mentor was saying. Stop making yourself such a target. Try and have more interests in things that the other boys do so that you can connect with them more. You know, you can afford to butch up a little bit. Mum would say sometimes, don't walk like that. You look like a sissy boy. And so she was always very wary about how I was being perceived. And if it was not matching up to how I was meant to be, then she would be quite critical of that. And so when I would complain about these kinds of things, you know, she would talk to me about those things. And then if I kept going back to her with, oh, but, then you'd hear the biblical quotes where, you know, well, just like Jesus, it's, you know, you should turn the other cheek. You know, suffering is something that you can offer up to God. How lucky are you that you have so much suffering that you can offer up to God, because that brings you closer. Everything you offer up to God brings you closer to Him and earns you a place in heaven. And then if I would continue to complain, she would say, well, you know, we all have our cross to bear. Just like Jesus had to carry his cross, our task in life is bearing that cross with as much grace and resilience as possible. And that, again, is your way of securing your rightful place in heaven. But none of those things answer the question. None of those things make the day-to-day right. And then I would say, well, like, we're always being taught about love and being kind to one another, and, you know, God is love and we need to emulate that in everything that we do. I'm like, how does what I'm experiencing from these other supposedly diehard perfect examples of Catholicism, how does that behavior remotely resemble the love from the Bible?
You're saying this now, but do you think that back then?
I was feeling it back then. I didn't have the words or I guess the eloquence to say it that way.
Or to shout hypocrites at them.
Yeah, I do remember one time having an argument with my mum because there is a Bible passage about how God is so against hypocrisy. And I remembered arming myself with that and using it. And again, she would just always say, no, you know, just got to bear your cross, turn the other cheek, offer it up.
Where could you go to hide from this really serious violence that's being inflicted on you?
For a while, I would just walk around by myself in the playground. I would sort of just seek to stay as far away from people as possible. But I eventually just ended up going to the bathrooms. I would find a cubicle that was free and I would sit there. I would pull reams of toilet paper off the rack and I would put it against the cracks in the doors so that people couldn't even see through, because I just wanted to have complete anonymity and just be left alone.
Would you eat your lunch in there, would you?
I would, yeah. And they weren't greatly kept bathrooms. But yeah, I would because it was just easier and safer and I was able to relax in there.
Naturally, you had more boy crushes from a distance, but were some of those boys among your tormentors?
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I would say it got very muddled up because I was attracted to, you know, the fit boy, the boy that was a bit taller and was a bit more filled out. He'd maybe gone through puberty a bit younger, so he was already starting to develop a bit more of a manly body and things like that. And then those boys seemed to be the ones that, well, because they were the strongest, they were the more invincible types. So they always ended up usually being the ones that would inflict the most pain.
As you got older and went into high school, the bullying got worse and worse, particularly during recess and lunchtime. Was there a moment where you just kind of snapped at the sheer viciousness of it all?
There was, yeah. So it would have been, I believe it was year 10. It might have been possibly early year 11. I'd finished singing at the opera a few years prior, so the escapism that performing gave me was no longer part of my life. So there was no escaping it. And so we'd gone on this school camp where the guest speaker had written a book about how immoral it is to kiss before marriage. Kissing leads to arousal. Arousal leads to sex. Sex can only happen in marriage. So therefore, shouldn't even kiss in the first place. That's kind of the thinking there. But while we were there, you know, we had a couple of teachers that were sort of monitoring it. But when it was nighttime or earlier in the mornings and we were in a dormitory, because it was held at an old boarding school in the Southern Highlands that still had dormitories and stuff, there really just wasn't much supervision. And I'm now surrounded by these kids 24 hours a day for the whole time we're on this camp. And they would take my pillow. So then I wouldn't have a pillow to sleep at nighttime, or they'd take my blankets. And so I'd be freezing cold. And then one day it had rained overnight and I'd gone to take a shower. And when I came back, one of the kids had emptied my suitcase of all of my clean clothes out the window. It was like on the second story of the building and into the wet mud down below. So I obviously had nothing to wear and they're all standing around sniggering and laughing. And that was my tipping point after all of those years. I was just like, I'm not putting up with this. So I started chasing this kid down, and I think it was the first time in my life that any of them had ever actually felt intimidated by me, because the rage that was coursing through me was scary to them.
Were you armed with anything?
At that stage I wasn't, but he threw open a door to run out the fire escape, which was this long metal staircase, and beside it was this gigantic broom. And I just picked it up and I just threw it at him down the stairs. And it hit him squarely in the back of the head while he was midway down these metal stairs. And he just crumpled underneath it and toppled down the whole rest of it. And everyone just went dead quiet. And obviously that's the moment that the teacher arrives, sees that specific moment. And suddenly I was this violent maniac. Meanwhile, for me, I'm thinking, well, this has been going on for years. Everyone's known about it. I've always been the victim, and this is the one time where I've actually asserted dominance. Wouldn't have needed to have escalated this way had it ever been addressed earlier. But rather than addressing it, it was more I was the thing that needed to be addressed.
You wrote that there were holes in your education. What was missing from what you were being taught at school?
It became very obvious that we were being taught everything through the Catholic conservative Opus Dei lens. When we were discussing King Henry VIII, we were really learning more about St. Thomas More.
Right, the martyr.
The martyr, exactly. And quite famously, he wore a hair shirt as corporal punishment for himself, which, interesting that the Opus Dei school, who don't like to talk about any forms of corporal punishment that they may or may not use on themselves, will hold up this man in high esteem. It was just so obvious that that's why we were focusing on him rather than King Henry VIII.
What about Charles Darwin and natural selection, theory of evolution?
Never even touched it. Never touched it. In fact, we would show up to school a week before a school year would begin and collect our textbooks that had been ordered for us, and just some chapters would be missing. Apart from evolution, we just never, ever spoke about sex education. It was never touched upon. And there's probably other parents in that world that will have that discussion with their own children, but my parents for sure never had that discussion. So I just never got taught anything about it. And given that I'd known since pretty early on that I was interested in boys rather than girls, I never once had any remote curiosity about female anatomy. So I'd never looked at an image. I'd never even tried to. Also, I wouldn't have been able to because my parents had this thing called Net Nanny on our computer.
Did you know that girls were anatomically different from boys?
Only insofar as you can't really miss breasts. So I knew that girls had breasts, but that was about it. I thought, girls had penises because that's how you pee. I was about 15 when I discovered that they didn't.
And you were 15?
Yeah.
What do you remember of your last day of school at Redfield College once you finally graduated?
I slept so well my last day of school. Thankfully, the last couple of years weren't as bad because by the time you get to year 11 and 12, your studies become a lot more important and serious to you because you're about to finish and start your life. And so the kids were more or less too busy to kind of really, keep me as their plaything.
No time for playground violence anymore.
Exactly right. So I was just very busy and sort of always off doing my own thing and pretty much left alone. And I just kept seeing that light at the end of the tunnel that I was just trying to get to. So when I did finish, I slept so soundly in my last day of school.
You wanted to be an actor. You always wanted to be an actor. You were really firm about that. But your mum wanted you to be a priest.
Yes.
How firm was she about that? What did she say to you about your desire to become an actor?
She saw the entertainment industry as superficial. She thought actors were selfish people, and she just thought of it as just being debauchery and sex, drugs, and just everything wrong with the world. What's
really amazing to me about your life outside of the school is when you've become involved with the arts, straight away in music, as a singer, zoom, you go right to the opera house stage. Mm-hmm. Same thing happened to you for acting, really, Tim, didn't it?
Yeah.
Very, very quickly you became very successful.
Yeah, it was kind of an anomaly. I just sort of put my head down and I knew what I wanted and I just sort of wasn't going to take no for an answer. But I certainly didn't think that the first thing I was going to do would be a Marvel film playing a superhero. That was quite the surprise. And even to this day, I'll see a scene and be like, yeah, I did actually do that, because it still feels a bit surreal and unreal that it did happen that way. But, always been told there's signs from God about what you're supposed to do with your life. To me, it's always just been an indication that I'm on the right track, that I am doing what I'm meant to be doing on this earth.
Meanwhile, at home, you write your mum busted you for your gay porn stash. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure she didn't take it well.
She did not, no. It was a very awkward moment. She'd found a magazine in my room and had removed every page and laid them all down on the dining room table. So I walked in and she's just there and she was white and she was just saying, is this who you are? Is this what you've become? It has to end now. And my dad was just standing in the corner of the kitchen, sort of just looking down, not making eye contact. And I just sort of felt so on the spot because it was this secret that I'd had all of my life. And there it was, right in front of me.
But could they come out and could they say, are you gay? Could they even ask you that question?
No, she never actually said that. She just said, is this who you are? Is this what you've become?
Why couldn't she utter those words?
I think it was too shameful. Because I will say for my own self, when I first ever told someone that I was gay, which wasn't until I was 27, I found it so difficult to say those two syllables, I'm gay. I just couldn't do it. It wouldn't come out of my mouth.
How did you find your way into a major Hollywood movie?
I was trying to audition for something else. that was being produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks in Melbourne. It was called The Pacific. It was a war series.
Oh, yeah, I saw it. It's great.
Yeah, and I really wanted to be a part of it. So I started sending the casting director my headshot and my show reel every single day. And then I would call them up 2-3 times a week and just check in that they'd received it. And then after about a month of that, they just said, fine, come in, we'll meet you, see what you're all about. I ended up doing like 12 callbacks. And ultimately, it was unsuccessful. But I just thought, they know who I am now. And then it just so happened a few months later, they were casting for the X-Men film that I got in. It was a very last-minute thing, and they just said, you've made an impression, you should come in for it. So I did, and I got it.
Your role was to play Scott Summers, who's a mutant. He becomes a member of the X-Men. And you were the young Scott Summers. His codename is Cyclops because he has a mutant ability that means he can project lethal, devastating energy bolts from his eyes. And the X-Men is an idea. The X-Men are persecuted for their powers because it's really like about the persecution of Jewish people, gay people, nerds. That's what made the X-Men so popular. I've seen the scene that you're in. It's an amazing scene. You're there writing lines on a blackboard in detention in this high school. A character called Sabretooth comes to get you and chases you. He's much bigger than you. He's like a bully.
Yep.
Chases you down the corridor while you run wildly. He pins you to the ground. And at that point, your eyes open and your eye energy blasts come out of you and they shear the entire building in half. You're the persecuted kid. But then you'd shear a high school in two. What were you thinking when you saw that scene? Is that kind of like a weird revenge fantasy or what?
Yeah, 100%. The whole experience felt a little bit like a revenge fantasy because they say that success is the best revenge. Growing up, when I was 15, that's when the first X-Men film came out, and it was obviously the thing that all of the boys were seeing and were loving and thinking that the action was so cool and the powers were so cool. And now I have grown up and I am that guy, but also all those kids back at school, they're going to be seeing me like me, the weakling, the easy target. I'm an actual superhero now, so how do you like me now? But it really wasn't. That particular scene, we shot parts of it in Sydney and parts up in Vancouver, and it was over like a period of 6 months. It wasn't until the Hollywood premiere when I did see it up on the screen that I really was able to take in the enormity of what it was and kind of look at myself for the first time in my life and go, I'm a cool dude. Then it was sort of after that kind of feeling of like, I did get my revenge because I decimated the school and it felt good.
But you also say that at the time of the launch, you were still kind of gripped with self-loathing and you're hiding yourself from the world. I think a lot of people would have thought you'd grown up on this little island and the wider world around you wouldn't have had a problem with who you were at all. And in fact, you're working in the movie industry, which has got gay people in every aspect, from the cast to the production to the management. Why was it so hard for you not to just simply step away from that world and into this new world that you were very successful in and that was going to be much more supportive and not care about your sexuality?
It really just comes down to the conditioning of it all. I had held on to those beliefs and had that kind of view of myself for such a long time that me wanting to be in the industry and having the success that I did, it was such a different world. I didn't really know how to hold my head above water in that world because that world had always been demonized. Being a worldly person, as my mum would say, is the opposite of what God wants for us. He wants us to be in complete self-denial, essentially. We don't exist for ourselves, we exist purely for Him. And the world only offers the here and now pleasures of this earthly life, which is what the devil, Satan, is trying to do to distract us from our true intention of getting to heaven.
And the truth is that world is also very cruel and narcissistic in its own way, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's good and bad in every walk of life. And I just think personally that life is meant to be about curiosity. And I think that if God exists and we were created, the purpose of us being created was to take in the fullness of His creation. And by reducing our experience to just the bubble that never challenges us, then we aren't actually living in the full creation that God is giving us. Therefore, we're not actually experiencing what He intends for us to experience. But I thought I can do both. I can be in that world and be successful as an actor, and I can still be the good, devout Catholic boy that I am. But I didn't know how to exist in that world.
So you came back to Australia and you were one of the leading characters in the much-loved series Dance Academy.
Yeah.
At some point, your mother persuaded you needed to get some therapy. Tell me how that unfolded, Tim.
So Mum unfortunately developed cancer in 2008. She was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, the silent killer. And though she battled for years with chemo and all of that, it just was too far gone. So in about middle way through 2011, she was basically told by her doctors that there was nothing more that could be done for her, and it was just a case of pain management until she was going to pass away. At that time, I was finishing up on Dance Academy. We were filming the second season of the show, and my character was leaving. On top of that, I also had found out that my father had been having an affair with my godmother, who's also my mother's cousin, and so I was very much grappling with the hypocrisy of the moral dilemma that presented when I had chastised myself so much for something that I'd never even acted on. So there's just a lot going on, and I was feeling quite overwhelmed and stressed by the whole situation. And then one day I had an argument with my mother, and my mum was, rummaging through my room again. And, I'm not the neatest person. She got very upset with me that my room was untidy and told me that my untidy room meant that I didn't love her.
Oh, she's dying at this point.
She was dying, yeah. She was, been given the death sentence. And the only guarantee that I had in my future was her funeral. And that's not really a happy place to be in. And so I was very, very stressed at the time and keeping a lot to myself. And so in a, misguided anger, I swore at her. I told her that she was a effing bitch. And which we never speak like that in my house. And my dad came running out and said, "How dare you yell at your mum like that?" And I just ran to my room and I slammed the door, and part of the door frame came off because I was so angered by the whole thing. And so the next morning my mum knocked on the door and said to me that she felt that her upcoming demise was playing on my mind and I wasn't coping with it very well, and suggested that I go see a therapist about it. And I thought, yeah, there's a lot that I need to speak about. This is a really good idea. She's like, "Well, actually, no one, and I've already made an appointment and it's in an hour, so let's hop in the car and go." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So got changed, hop in the car, and we drive down. We get there, and I noticed that the plaque on the wall said Catholic psychologist. And I thought, that's kind of a weird thing, and go into the office, and there's a big statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus there. And I'm like, okay. And then Mum goes in and has a half-hour session with the therapist before I do. And then she comes out, I go in, and straight away he tells me that he's a member of Opus Dei. And I just thought, at this stage I was 26, I'd done X-Men, done Dance Academy. I'd left school 8 years prior, and yet here I was now in this office with this guy who I was hoping I would be able to open myself fully up to. And he just starts telling me, like, I actually specialize in hypnotherapy. So I can hypnotize things like alcohol addiction or addiction to cigarettes or, I don't know, homosexuality. Then he just kept talking about all the successful hypnotherapy sessions that he's done with priests who have struggled with their sexuality, nuns who have struggled with their sexuality, mothers that have brought their sons in because their kid's gay and all of that. I hadn't mentioned that I was gay. I hadn't written that on my mental health questionnaire. And yet he kept talking about being able to hypnotize homosexuality out of people. So it became abundantly clear that I was there for that reason alone. And then he says, let's get you going.
And did you consent to that?
I was so used to being the guy that did whatever he was told that I just thought, my mum was dying. And I just thought it's probably worth not having a big family blowout about this thing. So I'll just sit here and I'm an actor. I will act. And he does a little prayer, and then he puts relaxing music of oceans lapping at the shore and tells me to close my eyes and start to picture the beach and what the trees look like, what the water looks like. So I had to sort of keep an ear out to what he was saying so that I would react the right way, while at the same time hoping, beyond hope, that it wouldn't actually affect me, because I didn't want to go under hypnosis. To me, it was the most vulnerable thing that you could do. I call it psychological rape because that's what it is. This was a stranger who was wanting me to be in a vulnerable state of mind that I wouldn't be in control of, so that he could come in and penetrate it and get out of it what he wanted. And that just felt so wrong. And it felt so insulting to me that I was tricked into this situation, and that, once again, my mum couldn't have just said, I think that you're gay and I'm worried that I'm going to die having a gay son. And she was doing whatever she could to make sure once and for all before she passed away that that wouldn't be the case. And so I just thought, look, I'll play ball. And so I pretended, and we finished up, and I just told him that it felt like having a nice nap, and he seemed very proud of himself. And I kept seeing him every week for another hypnotherapy session for the next few months. And then my mum passed away probably about 3.5, 4 months after that. And when she passed away, I just stopped going.
You must have had really complicated feelings when your mother died.
Yeah. I began to realise later on in life that I was codependent with my mother. I think she knew that her and my dad did not have a particularly close, affectionate relationship, but obviously divorce is out of the question. I'm not sure if she knew about the affair or not, but that would not be her course of action anyway. And I think that she knew that she could rely on me, because I did step up as her carer when I found out about what was going on with my dad. But in the same way, because her beliefs made it absolutely impossible for me to live authentically as myself, I needed all of my life to take my cues from her for how to be. So then when I lost her, when she did pass away, that was gone. And I realized I'd never really learned how to live life without having that sort of guidance and that structure, if that makes sense.
So after she died, were you free, or were you left kind of all at sea, I wonder?
Very much at sea, because now it was just me and Dad living at home alone, and I just didn't really talk to him that much. Whenever he was home, I would just shut myself in my room because I was angry with him. And so it was just this really weird limbo period where I just felt like I existed, and I obviously needed time to grieve the loss of my mother, but then also kind of go, well, what do I do now? And that's when I just thought, I'm going to set my sights on actually moving full-time to Hollywood. I didn't see it at the time, but it was a need to run away. I'm going to go make the life for myself that I want. So that's my focus. And so I just put all of my focus on that.
And you became an actively dating gay man at that point.
It took about a year for that, because in actual fact, it was several months after Mum passed away that I actually ever, for the first time in my life, did something and kissed a guy.
How old were you at that point?
I was like 26 at that stage. And I just remember feeling so ashamed of myself. I felt evil. In fact, I ran straight to a church because I wanted to go and sit in the presence of God in that moment because of how evil that I felt. So then for another 7-8 months after that, I did nothing. I just thought to myself, I tried to bargain with God. Okay, I've asked you to change this about me. You haven't. So give me my career and I will be happily celibate for the rest of my life. Just let me have success. That's how I would pray every night. And literally the moment I landed in LA, I found out I'd been cast in an American television series called Camp alongside Rachel Griffiths. And so I just thought, okay, everything's happening. And it was sort of during that time, literally 12 months after Mum had passed away, Dad was now engaged to the woman that he'd been seeing and was just a few months away from getting married himself. And I just thought, I'm 27 now, maybe I get to live my own life now. And that's when I met a boy and kissed him at a bar one night, and that sort of kick-started everything from there.
There was a Four Corners special that you were asked to be
Yes.
part of.
Mm-hmm.
They asked you to speak about your experiences growing up in an Opus Dei school, and you told the same stories you've just told me today. What response did you get from going on that Four Corners show?
The responses from that are the reason why I wrote the book. Hearing from so many people around the world who know what it's like when they were young and vulnerable to not have a voice and speak out for themselves, just the fact that they felt seen and heard for the first time, it made me realise the tremendous responsibility that people like myself have if we do understand what it's like to be a voice for the people that don't have it. It was overwhelming to see that.
You were asked to then become part of the campaign to ban gay conversion therapy, which was ultimately successful. Has that had some effect of trampling out shame in you, like pointless shame and pointless guilt for being made the way you were made?
Absolutely. I realised that I wasted a lot of my teens and 20s because I was so caught up in that. I don't want that for other people, which is why I did get involved in that campaign, and I'm honoured and humbled to have been able to use something that was a negative and turn it into a positive.
What do you think now about your mum, who did love you in her own way?
I just wish that she had the ability to listen, to reason, to have critical thinking. I know that there was nothing malicious or badly intentioned in the way that she was. She herself had grown up in a bubble. She really wanted the best for me for all eternity.
That's just it, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
For all eternity.
For all eternity.
So she was trying to make sure you were carried safely through this life, and so you'd be safe for heaven?
Yes. She was so blinded by that pursuit, she was unable to kind of see what the day-to-day harm is from the rhetoric, from the thought, from the beliefs. I know as much as she loved me, she would never want to have caused me the mental health harm that I went through. And I know that so many other parents out there have no idea that that is what is actually happening.
Those kids who beat you up at school, have any of them got in touch with you to say they're sorry for what they did?
Actually, yes. Since the Four Corners documentary, I've had a few of them reach out to me. And the sentiment is they totally understand what I went through. And they've also made mention of the fact that they were just allowed to do it. The collective thought in that community is unfortunately inherently homophobic. And for that reason, and because the teachers never really did enough to try and stamp this behaviour out, they just had a free rein. And now that they're adults, they recognise that. I'm also an adult, and I realise that kids are kids, and I really don't hold any grudges to any of these people, and I really appreciate them coming to me. I don't want them losing sleep over it, though. As long as the next generations learn from all of that, then that's all I can ask for.
The book is called The Truth Will Set You Free. There's an obvious reason why you'd call your book that, but there's other reasons too, isn't there?
Yes, The Truth Will Set You Free, or Veritas Liberabit Vos in Latin, is the school motto of Redfield College, which always rang really false to me because my truth put me in a cage in their world. So when I was writing this book, I thought, what's a good title for this? And it just felt like it couldn't be more perfect.
Fascinating speaking with you, Tim, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Tim Pocock's memoir is called The Truth Will Set You Free, Growing Up Gay in Opus Dei. Today's conversation with Tim Pocock was made in the lands of the Gadigal people. Producer was Maggie Morris. Executive producer is Nicola Harrison. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.